me think of Indianness, that we are rooted in our history, in our religion, our gods, our food, our clothes, the thousands and thousands and thousands of years of people in that land that still speak through us today. But we are hopeful for the future. We feel confident that India and being Indian is a net benefit for this planet. We are good. We are good leaders. We are good people. We are kind. We're tough, and we can be nasty too, obviously. But there's a lot of special, unique qualities that make us, we're grounded in the past, but we will transform the future. For me, that's Indianness. I had learned from consulting, there is nothing wrong with not knowing the answer. If someone asks you a question and you don't know, be honest. Grandfather, father, Sonia, be honest. I don't know, but I do know how to figure it out. I will figure it out. I will come back to you. Small administrative jobs, wait for the man to raise his hand. Don't volunteer, even if it's uncomfortable and everybody's staring at you. You don't have to be confrontational, but you don't always have to be the person who just picks it up because it makes things go easier.
Welcome to the Indianness Podcast, a show about leaders of Indian origin who have overcome challenges and worked with dedication to ultimately achieve success. By telling the stories of the defining milestones in their journeys, we hope to inspire others to learn how they too can succeed in their pursuits. Here's your host, Sanjay Puri.
Welcome to the Indianness Podcast, stories of success from leaders and changemakers of Indian origin. Why have Indians around the globe in so many different disciplines been so successful? I get asked that all the time. I have no idea, but let's find out together what their secret sauce is, and because every story is so unique. And today I'm so excited to have Sonia Vora with us today. She's currently the Chief Strategy Officer at Brighter Inc., a groundbreaking mental wellness company, and she was most recently the Chief Human Resources Officer at Gates Foundation. Throughout her remarkable career, she's been a champion for human potential and a visionary leader in transforming HR through AI integration and strategic workforce development. But what fascinates me most about Sonia is her unique journey from a child of immigrants to becoming a transformational executive who has pioneered AI into HR, but also championed diversity and inclusion and mentored countless women of color in leadership positions. Welcome, Sonia. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Thank you, Sanjay. It's so wonderful to be here.
Awesome. Sonia, we have a global audience, and as I told you before, this is really about your life journey, but it's also their life journey and how your life journey can impact theirs, how it can be a teaching moment, an inspirational moment. So with that, we definitely want to start right from the beginning. So tell our audience, tell our listeners, where were you born? And then we want to know a little bit about your parents, about your siblings, maybe even about your grandparents. So tell us where it all began.
Well, it's such a wonderful question because it gave me the opportunity to talk to my parents a little bit more deeply. And I'd heard stories my entire life, but to actually get them, my uncle is visiting them from California. So I got the whole 360 view. So my father was born in Amreli, Gujarat. My mother was born and basically raised most of her life in Indore. And they ended up meeting at medical school. But their backgrounds were fascinating. My mother's father was in the military. I think she said for her entire life and until he passed, they actually lived under the same roof for only 4 years. He was fighting one war after the other, from World War II to the war with Pakistan, between Pakistan and India, Kashmir, Cambodia. But he was a huge, amazing supporter of her in a way that you didn't often see Indian fathers being that way with their daughters. Her mother died shortly after she was born. And so her grandmother did a lot of the raising. And she felt that her grandmother resented her, felt like if she weren't born, her daughter would still be alive. My mother was a preemie. She was in the ICU for a month. And so I think all of that led to my grandfather thinking of her as a miracle baby. But with her grandmother, she was repeatedly told, don't go to school, get married at 16, you're not a great person. And so she feels that made her tough and fearless. And so when she decided to go to medical school, her grandmother was so opposed to it that she refused to give her the entrance fee on day one. And this is such a story, I think, that represents my mother. She said, well, I'm going to go anyway. So she went to the medical school. She had a whole plan on convincing the dean, who had been a former neighbor 20 years before, and say, trust me, you know my father, you're going to get the money, but I don't want to miss one day of class. And she ran, and she was standing on the steps looking up, and she saw what she thought was a vision of her father in full colonel uniform standing at the top of the stairs. And she said, are you really there? And he said, I'm here. I got your telegram. I came from Kashmir. I said, I need time off. I already paid the dean. And she flew up the stairs and hugged him. And he said, I always believe in you. I always wanted you to be a doctor, like the doctor that saved your life when you were born. And so from that point, knowing that she had at least one person who completely believed in her made all the difference. My father was born to a mother who was 15, and his father was 22. And they had 4 kids by the time my grandmother was like 22. And he felt his father kept progressing in government. So they moved around a little bit. They were in Gwalior, Indore. He eventually became the textile commissioner in Mumbai. And one of the things that he remembers about his father, my grandfather, he's so honest, at that time, that position at that level was filled with corruption, right? People made millions just being in that role. My grandfather didn't. He didn't know how to do it. He didn't like it. He wouldn't even accept the volley gifts. He's like, that's not the way that this is meant to be. And so my father learned there's not a better life than an honest one. You never have regrets. You never have to doubt yourself. And so my parents met in medical school. They eventually came to New York. They both knew that America was where they wanted to be, where they felt like you could work hard and reap the rewards of your work. Other people wouldn't take credit for it, etc. But New York was not the America they saw in the movies and in the TV shows. They were like, it's crowded. And New York in the 70s was not the best place in the world. They were living on Times Square. So they met a doctor who said, why don't you come to Michigan? It's so much nicer. So they eventually moved to Michigan, set up their practices, and that's where my sister and I were born.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. You're born to well, first, before that, did you know all this before coming on the show, or this is something you found out? Because that's a pretty interesting background of your grandparents, especially.
I did know a lot of it. I didn't know sometimes the specific details of the year they met or who they talked to even get this idea of coming to Michigan. But I definitely had heard the stories. My grandmother, my father's mother, she was not educated. She was married at 15, as I said. But if you ever talked to her, I felt like in another age, she could have been prime minister. I mean, her brain operated at such a sophisticated level. I remember talking to her in broken Gujarati and broken English. She knew senators in the United States. I mean, she knew politics at such a sophisticated degree. Her retention of and insights was incredible. And it always made me think of, the women that came before me didn't always have the opportunity. They definitely did not have the opportunities that I was given. And that's a sort of honor and a responsibility to say, but I do, what am I going to do with it?
Well, that's fantastic. Real inspirational grandparents, and then parents. did they come here? Both of them are physicians, and did they meet in New York City when when they came here?
No, they actually met in medical school. They went to MGM in Indore, Mahatma Gandhi Medical
Okay.
School in Indore.
Okay.
My mother was actually 2 years older than is 2 years older than my father. So she was already in near residency. My father was doing the rotation, and he was doing an OBGYN rotation. So, you're on call, but you got to wait for the babies when they're ready. So they had many hours in the waiting rooms having coffee. So they were friends for 4 years. And it was getting to the point where, even though my grandfather was completely supportive of my mother, he's like, isn't it time to get married? And she said, well, sure. And then my father wanted to marry her, but found out his parents absolutely did not approve of my mother. She was a different caste from a different region. She was older. She was professional. And more important, they wanted to arrange the marriage. My grandfather immediately fell in love with my mother. That was not an issue. But at one point, they did decide to get married because my father said, they don't approve. I'm so angry. And my mom's like, I knew he was the right one for me when he said, but they don't even know you. And they said, no, I would like to marry you anyway, if you and your parents are okay. So yes, they were fine. And so when my mother met my grandmother, at one point they were alone. And my grandmother, again, I told you, she was very savvy. And she said, I just don't think this is right. Kirit, my father, he's very naive. He's very innocent. And I don't think this is right. I think you should say no. And my mom said, I don't know how this came to me, but I said to her, okay, that's fine. I will say no if that's what you want. But just know that your son will never be the son that you think he will be, that you want him to be. He is not going to be happy with this decision. He's going to go to America anyway. And really, it's what your decision is, not what I should do. And my grandmother was quiet for a few minutes, and she said, you're right. And so they went forward, they got married, and they had both wanted to come to the United States, and there was a way to apply. It's called the Green Book, and so they did. My dad came to New York first, where my uncle was at a St. Clair hospital, and then my mother joined 4 months later.
Fantastic. What a great story. And I want to come back to that. So you were born in Michigan, right?
Yeah, Detroit.
In Detroit. What do you remember? Talk a little bit about your early years. What do you remember? Were you the oldest, Sonia?
Yes, I'm the older of two. I remember my parents lived in a medical apartment. I could have been more than, I think we moved to the suburbs when I was 3 or 4, but I do have these very strong memories of this medical apartments, which is near the hospitals. It was all filled with residents and doctors and all their kids. And we would have big Indian fueled parties in their rec room. And I remember thinking that was so fun. What I didn't remember, and I've always sort of regretted not being able to speak Hindi or Gujarati fluently. And there were many family members that I wasn't able to get as close to because of that. But my parents had told me, you didn't speak for 3 or 4 years. It was very concerning. You just didn't talk. And so we took you to the doctor, and they said, there's nothing wrong with her. And then one day they put me in front of the TV, and some cartoon was on, and suddenly it all came out. And I think they realized what happened was, because they were speaking Gujarati, Hindi, and English in the house, I just didn't know how to talk. And then suddenly it came out, and I never stopped talking after that.
So it is, if nothing works, use cartoons is what the message
That's
is
it.
for
Yes. Best
our
parenting.
listeners.
Yes.
Any parents who have children who are not talking, use cartoons as a
Bugs
great
Bunny.
segue. Yeah. So it was basically, they were physicians. Were they doing residency when you were born here
Yeah,
in the US?
as I'm sure you know, and that you have to redo it when you come to the
Yeah.
United States. And my mother always wanted to be a surgeon, but they said at medical school, the chief of surgery was very anti-female, thought none of them should be in medical school, go back to the kitchen. And so everyone kept telling her, why would you choose that hard road? And she was always very rebellious. She had a story I'd love to tell you and your audience. She told a visiting professor in anatomy from Punjab that he was wrong on a fact. And he said, I'm not wrong. And she's like, yes, you are. And he said, all right, go get the book. But if I'm right, I'm taking 25 points off your score. You'll still pass. She was always number one in her scores. You'll pass, but you won't be number one. If I'm right, I'll give you 25 points, will be the most I will ever give a student. So she ran to get the book. And outside, her local professor is, why are you challenging this man? What are you doing? Like, it's so disrespectful. She's like, but I'm right. And so she got the book. And she's like, she showed her local professor. She's like, look on page 30 and paragraph 2. And he said, oh, you even know the page. Like, I know. And she was right. So the professor took the book to the visiting professor, and she was worried he'd be upset. And he just started laughing. He's like, I knew you were right, but I was testing your confidence. A surgeon must have confidence in themselves. So meanwhile, she wanted to go to surgery. Everyone was telling her it was a bad idea because this one man would make her life miserable. Meanwhile, the chief of OBGYN said, I keep getting the second and third raters, and you're a first rater. I want you in, and you'll still be able to do surgery. So she went into OBGYN. She liked it. She came over. Obviously, they had to redo their residencies. My dad was a urologist. But after she had my sister and me, she's like, OBGYN schedules are way too erratic. So she retook her board exams and became a family practice physician and had her own practice for many decades. So yes, we were born while they were doing their residency. And then eventually, as they moved into practice, we moved to the suburbs.
Oh, fantastic. So talk just a little bit about what kind of environment. I mean, you talked about an Indian fueled environment with obviously multilingual, as you said, there was Gujarati, Hindi, English going on, which kind of stopped you and suddenly it came out. Um, what was the environment like growing up? You know, was there an emphasis on studies? Was there, what was the emphasis like at that time?
So we moved to the suburbs, and the closest private school happened to be a Baptist school, which is a more evangelical denomination in Christianity. My parents obviously knew the Catholic schools in India. So I went there from preschool to fourth grade. I became a real Bible thumper, Sanjay. Like, I was told, like, if you don't want your friends to go to hell, you've got to convert them. And my parents were open. And I think at one point they began to realize this is a little weird. And so we ended up we went to a more open private school. But my parents were always extremely loving. And I've always felt like they liked us. They just didn't love us. They were busy. They were always working. And sometimes my mom today will feel like, oh, I see parents today and they're involved in every single aspect of their child's life. We weren't. And I said, no, you weren't. But when it was your choice, you chose to spend it with us. When you weren't working, they never needed time off from their kids, like a weekend away. Every restaurant, every dinner, every trip, we were with them. So I remember it being, they loved us and they liked us. They were very, very open. Like, whatever you want to do it. In fact, they taught us, like, you're two girls. You need to learn to make money, not to be rich, but have a skill where you can always earn your own way. So you don't have to rely on someone else for your life, because that's what gets you in bad situations where someone doesn't respect you or maybe even abuses you. So I always remember they taught us to be independent, to have our own mind, and to take care of each other. Studies were important, but it was also about, take care of the family, take care of each other, and take care of yourself.
So obviously they were busy, didn't have as much time, and times were different then, obviously, um, but um, there was a focus on education. You first went to this Baptist school, and then you moved over to this private school. Was there any kind of pressure from them in terms of studies for you? Hey, you need to, um, you know, be top of the class or something of that nature?
No, they didn't. We did well in school, and
Mm,
um, our parent teacher conferences were always positive. So I don't think they felt like they had to, but I think it goes back, like they expected it. They expected us to be making A's, but they didn't sort of beat us over the head to say, you must do this, you must do that. They never use that. They never in their life use their phrase, you have to be X, you must do this. They just
mhm.
said, do well, respect yourself, work hard. Um, and, they obviously were born at a time after World War II partition. My mother said, if she was very young, but so, those young memories are so visceral. She remembered the latter aspects of partition where she's like, we had been living in this integrated Hindu Muslim community. It was for centuries. And all of a sudden, and in a young mind, you don't know why it's happening. Suddenly it was ripped apart. It was violence everywhere. All her Muslim friends left and she didn't know why. And she said, and she saw people lose everything. And my parents always taught us, the world can take everything away from you, but what they can't take away from you is your love, your education, and the fact that you can take care of yourself. So that goes back to that it's important, but it's important in this way of how to live a good life, not we're projecting our desires on you.
So there wasn't as much pressure because obviously one of the things we joke about, at least in this podcast, is that there are uh, basically, it's a two choice from a career standpoint, and we'll come
Right.
to that. It's the being a doctor or an engineer, and there are only two kinds of grades that are acceptable. It's in A plus and a grudging A.
That's right.
And that's what we talk about. But it doesn't appear that was the case for you
Mm-mm.
because if you really think about it, both your parents were physicians. Now, you are not, I don't know about your sister. Is she a physician herself?
No, she's a business leader, sales, marketing, chief commercial officer, so very senior executive as well.
Okay.
And
So, Sonia, just taking this thread a little bit, obviously, you were in this private school. There was no nudging you to kind of go into medicine at all?
no, not at all. In fact, one thing I was going to say before is I give my parents a lot of credit for my many decades later when I got into HR and leadership development, obviously reading and learning a lot, observing. There's nothing more powerful than intrinsic motivation. We all have it. Um, we have the desire within us to grow, to develop. It can be suppressed, it can be redirected, but it is so much more powerful than extrinsic motivation. If someone's telling you you have to do something, you might do it. But if the inside of you is saying, where's my path and where's my passion? That is unquenchable. My parents always nurtured that. So it was a little unconventional compared to our other sort of Indian friends, where their parents were much more, you must do this, you must do this. Um, and some of them, you might say, traditionally succeeded. And many of them were very unhappy for a long time because they went down paths that were not their paths. And so what my parents did was not like externally tell us what to do, but they told us on the inside. They encouraged the blossoming of who we were on the inside every day. And we heard their stories and we saw their paths. So, so yeah, back to the question. No, they never pushed us to be doctors. In fact, sometimes they said, sometimes being a doctor is hard and the insurance companies and everything else. But I remember later I was talking to my dad in my 20s and I said, well, you always told us not to be a doctor. He's like, I literally never said that. I would have loved it if you guys became doctors. I'm very happy with what you've done, but we would have loved it if you became doctors, but we were not going to impose our wishes on you. In fact, I'll tell you this one story. My parents were so, I guess you could say, liberal with us. I mean, we never got, we were good kids, but we sometimes got in trouble. We never got spanked or anything like that. And I remember we were sitting, a bunch of kids were sitting in the basement at some party. All the Indian parents were upstairs. We were in the basement. We're 10 years old. And we were talking about how our parents punished us, more in a joking way. I said, ooh, one time I got in trouble and I had to go sit in my room for 20 minutes. Very mild punishment. Everyone was telling their own version. And this one boy just said almost offhandedly, yeah, sometimes my mother beats me with a rolling pin. And we're all like, what? What do you mean? Why? That's horrible. He's like, because she heard that I was talking to a girl in school. And I thought, oh my God. Even at 10, I was like, lady, you moved to America. America has co-ed schools. Your boy is 10 years old. He was probably sitting next to a girl. They were talking about school. Obviously, purely innocently, they're 10. And because of that, you're bringing this old mentality of boys and girls should never talk. And my way in India was the right way and everything here is bad. My parents were far more adaptable. They made the choice to come to America. They were observing the cultures. They told us, don't do drugs. You're not going to date boys, at a young age. But they were never bringing some old mindset into this different future that they asked for. They built this.
So, Sonia, you made one point, I think, which is a very important point, especially for our listeners, which is the point about this intrinsic motivation. Because, folks who are parents or people, managers, employers, etc., sometimes struggle with others in terms of, hey,
Oh, yes.
how do I motivate this person? Whether, as I said, it could be a sibling, child, employee, whatever it is. How how were your parents able? Now you look back and you're especially in HR and you know this a little bit, and this is really for our audience. How does one get somebody to bring out their intrinsic motivation? Is there a formula for that? Or did your parents know that formula?
I think they did subconsciously. And in my HR work, I've tried to bring that externally and say, what is that magic formula, to use your phrase? A very influential book I read was Drive by Daniel Pink. And it starts off by sharing an anecdote of a study that had people coming in for a scientific study, but they were sitting in the waiting room waiting to start. And there were some puzzles on the table and no one was watching them. And they said one by one, they would come to the table and start doing the puzzles. Little do they know that was the experiment. The experiment was, given the choice of doing nothing, taking a nap, eating some snacks, or doing these puzzles, they always chose the puzzles. Human beings intrinsically like solving things. They like building things. They like resolving things. So why in the workplace are we not, because what most of us do now, if you're not in a sort of manual labor field, most of corporate life is solving problems one way or the other. That is an intrinsic motivation that we already have. And yet the way we construct management hierarchy or how to have expectations or it suppresses that. So no one can motivate someone else. They can only unlock their own internal motivation. You think about elite athletes, they already are they're going to climb that mountain, run that race. So what's the point of a coach? The coach is just to keep unlocking what's already within them. What's the point of a manager when someone is already intrinsically motivated and qualified for that job? Your job is not to make them do something that you think they should do. Your job is to unlock in them their deep stores of potential and qualifications. And how do you do that? You actually have to look at them. We talk about vision a lot as a leader, and that often means What's the future? Where are we going? Let me paint a picture for you. And that's important. I have to know where you want to take us for me to want to follow. But it also means at a micro level, look at the other person. Listen, I'm not a person that knows everyone's kids' names. Terrible memory. I don't know what your husband does for work or what your dog, how old your dog is. I don't know. I'm not going to go out to dinner with everybody. And I don't mean being friends with everybody. And I don't mean knowing every detail about their life. I hate networking, small talk. So you do it because that's part of business life. But that's not a natural thing for me. What is natural for me is when I'm talking to somebody and I'm just asking them questions like, what keeps you up at night? What are you worried about at work? If you had a magic overnight and you came into work and everything was working really well, what would have changed? Or, hey, you're much closer to the client than I am. What are we missing? I mean, these are questions that are just digging out from them things that managers never ask. They just tell them, here's what you need to do and I will evaluate you like we're still in school. We just have to reconstruct the whole thing and say the manager's role is to extract that motivate, to encourage and unlock that motivation, clear the rubble out of the way, and provide enough of a boundary to say, here's your job, here's your expectations, here's what good looks like. And if you do well, this is the reward. If you don't do well, here are the consequences. And that contract should not be changeable. Like, we understand that's true. And it's consistent with everyone else on this team. After that, if you've got an employee who likes what they do, who comes into work every day, like no one comes in wanting to do a bad job. Everyone wants to do a good job. And you understand how are they experiencing their job? What could you do to make it better? You take an interest in that, you will unlock their intrinsic motivation and you will be, I've had 20 years of seeing over and over again, hundreds of people that I've managed. What comes forth from that is something you could never have imagined being possible.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very, very helpful, especially to folks in our audience who are dealing with people, dealing with employees, etc. Sonia, coming back to growing up, so you went through this school in the suburbs of Michigan. Uh, when you were finishing up school, when you were looking at college, what what kind of decision points? How did you figure out where to go, what to do? Tell us a little bit briefly about that.
Sure. Well, high school was hard. I went
Hmm.
to a very elite private school. My class in particular were very unpleasant, cliquey. There were some very rich kids who were just didn't treat people very nicely. And there weren't a lot of Indian people where I lived at the time. And if there were,
Hmm.
they were all going to Country Day, which was the math and science school. We were at Cranbrook, which was the more art school. And so aside from some of the friends that my parents had made, I didn't know many Indian people. Our temple hadn't been built yet, so I didn't know where all the community was. Obviously, I'm sure many of your listeners, at least U.S. listeners, would know that Detroit has had a lot of racial tension for decades between
Hmm.
black and white, and so we had a lot of conversations about that between black students and white students. And I remember sitting there just saying, "Wonder where I fit in. Am I more of an experience that a black student might have or a white student would have?" Um, I was treated very differently. People didn't know what to do with brown skin. I remember kids asking me if I just came back from Florida because I had such a nice tan, or being told, "Didn't you take a shower today because your skin is dirty? Your house smells funny," or, "What are those clothes that you're wearing?" And so I always felt like I didn't fit in. Now, I think a lot of people feel that way in high school, but I didn't know where my group was. And I knew that going to college, I knew I didn't want to go. I wasn't quite ready to move far away from home. So I was looking at schools in Michigan. And there was obviously University of Michigan, which felt extremely overwhelming to me. And then there was a small sort of private universities, um, which is where I went to Albion College in Michigan. It's a great private small school. I felt like suddenly I blossomed. People were treating me differently. There was a bad aspect to that, but suddenly I was pretty and popular, and I was the DJ, and I could be in the band. I learned how to play drums, and I was in this band, and all these things. I was in this popular sorority. I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. The bad aspect to that was I went from being othered to being exoticized. So people thought, oh, you are from India, and oh, that's so exotic, and that culture and Kama Sutra, and oh, that's so interesting. And I'm like, I'm still different from everybody. And so I think part of that, Sanjay, is that I learned to be an extremely precise and astute observer of human behavior, because I had to figure out, why am I different from everybody? I also was amongst the first generation born in the United States. And I wrote a paper on this when I was 12. What's it like to be the first of your kind in a new place? But a half a generation later, these were the kids that were born like 10 years after me. They were much more of like, there's more of us. There's more of a comfort. Once you're past 3 or 4, you can be comfortable that you can be your own group. And I remember I changed my name legally when I was 15 from Sonal to Sonia, because nobody could deal with Sonal in Michigan in the 1970s and 80s. They were like, roll call, Betty, Karen, Joe. Oh boy, oh no, I don't know what to do with this name. My parents were supportive, so I became Sonia Vora. Like my friend who was 10 years younger, she's Pakistani. Her name is Maheen. Now that's a very easy name. I mean, there's no other way that you could look at that name and pronounce it. But she had trouble in school. But even 10 years later, there was enough of the community and her own confidence to tell a professor, it's Maheen. Just spell it out. It's not that hard, right? I felt like I needed to change my name. She felt like she could assert the boldness of, get my name right. It's not that hard.
Do you regret changing your name? Because a
No.
lot of us have, at some point or others, maybe not anymore, but at least if you go back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, have had that experience of, people can't pronounce your name or things of that nature. You don't regret changing your name?
So I don't believe in regrets. I believe that we make the best decisions we make with the information and the circumstances of the time, that the best that you can do is look in the mirror every night and say, with what I knew today, did I make the best decisions that I could? So looking back 20 years in a completely different world, 30 years doesn't make sense to me. However, I would say today, I would not change my name if my name were Sonal. I would be more like Maheen, maybe not as militant, but I'd say Sonal, and people would get it. I do remember when my first job in HR, I think I was hired because I'm Indian, actually. They were opening up offices in Bangalore, and nobody wanted to go to India. I mean, this is like 2010 or 2012 or something. And I had been living on the East Coast, and it was very cosmopolitan, obviously. So moving to Chicago, to this old bank, and people didn't want to go to India because they heard there's no food in India, so they were taking power bars with them. Then I show up for an informational interview, and they said, would you be willing to go to Bangalore? Like they were offering me a chance to go bite a tiger. And I was like, obviously, you're going to pay for me, business class, 5-star hotel, do some fun work in a startup. Yes. And so that began my HR career, because I kept taking jobs no one else wanted to do. And there were a lot of Southern people from Southern India there, and I could tell they all shortened their name to like a letter. And I started asking them, like, but I want to say your whole name, like share. They're like, no. And I was obviously senior, and they were younger and junior. And sometimes they did, and they seemed happy. But then I also realized, but am I making them uncomfortable? Like pushing them, like they decided to shorten their name. They don't want to make a big deal out of it. A name is a really big deal for people. And I don't know that I've ever reconciled asking someone, forcing them to tell me their full name as if I'm being more inclusive, or actually I'm imposing my worldview that you should be able to tell your name, screw everybody else. I haven't quite figured that one out yet.
So, do your parents call you Sonia or Sonal?
My family calls me Sonal. And then it's funny because I didn't want my name to be a thing, right? Like I'm just call me Sonia. It's a multicultural name. Everyone sort of has it in their culture. But a friend of mine from high school came with me to college and she called me Sonal. Then everyone's like, but what's Sonal? And I'm like, that's my Indian name. But we like that better. So then half the people that followed me. And then people didn't know how to spell Sonia, even though they were emailing me, they would spell it wrong with a J or a Y. And they would add their own pronunciation to it, like Sanja, which I'm like, first of all, that's not a name. Secondly, God, so my name followed me. And one time, when you're in team meetings and everyone says, share one fact that people don't know about you. Now, this was like 3 years ago. So I said, well, you probably don't know that I was born with an Indian name, and then I changed it. I have now been Sonia for 30 years. I was, Sonal for 15. And so one guy took it up and it's like, he started calling me Sonal. And I'm like, okay, Dave, I didn't know how to say this to him because I thought it was really sweet of him. He wanted to be very diverse, inclusive. And I said, David, I really appreciate that, but actually that's just my family name now. I've now made that like my special name just for my family, not for you. And he understood. And
no, that makes a lot of sense. Sonia, when you obviously went to this small college because obviously you didn't want to go to a very large college. How did you end up at, obviously you did, as you said, the good news was you did a lot of jobs that very few people wanted to do. How did you, from that journey, did you end up at Gates?
I went to business school for international finance after spending a couple of years in investment banking. And I thought, I don't really love the culture of investment banking. I have a skill set. I'd love to work somewhere that did good in the world. Mm-hmm. So I applied in New York, Women's World Bank, the IMF, places I thought could use my skill set. And they said, no, you don't have NGO or not-for-profit experience. So I said, okay, then that will be something I do in my life, not my career. Mm-hmm. After a certain point, I thought, this is not right? Like the praise that I got from the Indian community was very addictive, right? My parents were always neutral and proud of us, no matter what we did, whether we were like jobless or CHRO. They were just like, whatever you're doing is wonderful. But the community was like, oh, I was 26 and I'm traveling around the country, meeting with CEOs as strategy consultant. I was making a lot of money, but I didn't feel great on the inside. So I did a complete 180. I always loved reading and writing. So I went to graduate school for creative writing. And part of the scholarship was to do some teaching. And so I came out of that saying, I love to write. I need to make some money. I know, banking background, writing, teaching background, I'll be a corporate trainer. I got the informational interview at Northern Trust. They were opening an office in India. So they literally hired me that day, amazingly, and shipped me off to India. And repeatedly, I learned that all this background all came together in HR. Analytical skills, writing skills, creative skills, treating people nicely skills. And then I took the jobs that no one else wanted. I went to India. I globalized programs. There was a team that nobody wanted to manage. It was a 90-person global team. I'd never managed one person in my life. I am sure I'm not the first person they asked, but they asked me if I would be the manager. And in fact, they had lined up 3 or 4 senior executives to call and convince me. And I said yes on the spot. How many times in life does an opportunity like that come around? What's the worst you can do? You can fail, you learn, you move on. I had learned from consulting, there is nothing wrong with not knowing the answer. If someone asks you a question and you don't know, be honest. Grandfather, father, Sonia, be honest. I don't know, but I do know how to figure it out. I will figure it out. I will come back to you. So that's how I approached every single thing. And as my father had always taught us, you need 2 things to be successful in this world. I added a third: ambition male, female, old, young, race, gender, anything, you have to have that internal drive, that ambition to grow, to develop, to achieve, and imagination. You have to be able to dream differently than what your life already is. Dream big. He's like, do you ever think that I was making $7,000 a year? I loved it. I knew I would make more, but I'm like, I'm going to go get a nice house in the suburbs. And it's like, you're a fool. You can't afford it. He's like, yes, I will. I will work hard and I will achieve it. And my third one that I add is empathy. In a world that is increasingly technocratic, fractured, politicized, outrage is the currency of the time. Empathy, being able to look at other people and try to see how they see the world, and that they see that you actually are genuinely interested in them as people, not as performers or a ticket to the promotion. That builds connections, it builds trust, and then ultimately your teams are going to do well. So I just kept making my way up the ladder, and then I got the magic call. Hey, we've got this role open at the Gates Foundation. I thought, oh my God, 15 years ago, I was told I would never get a job in one of these types of organizations. This is my ultimate dream, to be working for the largest philanthropy in the world on a global scale. Once I got in there, complete chaos, fixed, built, cleaned up. And the next thing you know, they asked me to be the CHRO and take on the hardest project ever conceived of that had been sitting in a quagmire for 10 years. And that's what I did. So that's how I got there.
So, Sonia, for our audience, let's talk a little bit about some key inflection points in your life. I have a little bit of an idea, but I really want to hear from you. I'll throw some things at you, but you tell us, because an inflection points, which when you look back, you say, hey, if it had not gone this way, things would have been very different, or decisions you made, or maybe decisions that were made for you. Going to a small college, was that an inflection point in your?
A major inflection point. I thought, well, after 1 year, I can always apply to a bigger or maybe more prestigious school. I always loved the idea of Princeton, for example. But after year one, and I had the grades, I mean, I'd done all these extracurriculars. I was like a 4.3 student. I mean, I was doing amazingly. I thought, as a transfer student, it's a little bit, at the time, a little bit easier. And I decided not to. I told you I don't believe in regrets, but there were times when I definitely wondered, as I came out into the workforce and I was competing with people who went to the Ivy Leagues, who had all these contacts and connections. Ooh, should I have gone to a bigger school? Now I see my nieces getting older and applying and going to colleges. And I remember thinking, it matters. Where you go to school in terms of a resume matters for a few years. It does open doors. And then once you're in, it's about you. Where you go to graduate school is maybe even more important. So I did know that when I applied to business school, I needed to go to a highly prestigious name, like good school, obviously, but a names Ivy like Georgetown. And that meant more. But I will tell you also that I remember sitting in a meeting 15 years later and realized, I don't know how this came up. Everyone was talking about where they went to college. And 5 out of 7 of them went to Harvard. And I thought it was amazing to me that, like, Harvard's a great school. I would have gone if I had applied and gotten in, but also it didn't matter. We were all in the same job 10 years later, like doing the work. And so that was a major inflection point. What I think it gave me, though, Sanjay, was the confidence I did not have. I had confidence because my family liked and loved me. I did not have confidence in high school. I had a mean class. I was treated really differently. I was not one of the big rich kids with the fancy clothes and everything every time. I looked different, my hair, my clothes, everything. I just was not, I felt very bad about myself. College changed that. And again, this was all external validation, which as a teenager is what you're looking for. And this is before social media, my gosh. Suddenly I had all this external validation in college that I was bright. People liked me. I made friends. I could do lots of different things. And so more good than bad, it was a major inflection point.
You blossomed out there. So that was a major inflection point. Let's talk about, and that was a decision you made yourself, right?
Yeah.
That
Yes.
was your decision.
My decision.
So this is again for our listeners. Sometimes maybe Ivy League, obviously, I think Sonia mentions it gives you a Rolodex. It does matter to go to those schools, but she was coming from a pretty tough school environment where, Sonia, correct me if I'm wrong, self-esteem was maybe not at the highest level that you
Absolutely.
had. And this really enabled you to really get your bearings together. Sonia, was the first job where circumstances, whatever you call it, this company had this operation in India and they were desperate because maybe at that time people were not as familiar and they needed somebody to go to India, and you raised your hand. And we want to talk about raising hands because there's a lesson in there also, is that sometimes you just maybe raise your hand. So was that an inflection point? If not,
Oh,
what is the
incredibly.
message about raising hands? Sometimes you raise hands when others don't.
That is how you can make a career. And when people sometimes said, well, because earlier in my career in HR, my manager gave me feedback. She's like, now I don't see it, but two other people think this of a team of 10. You're too ambitious. And I never quite got over that. In fact, that became the seed for this book that I'm writing. We can talk about later, but it's called Permission Not Required. It's particularly about the feedback that women get more often, I think, than men, where we're criticized about who we are, not what we do. You're too ambitious. You're too nice. You're too intimidating. I've heard a lot of them. You're too ambitious. And I really had to sit with that and say, well, why is that bad? And why would someone say, like, am I doing something? No, you're great. Am I taking credit? No. I'm like, so what's the criticism here? And I think it was, you haven't earned your spot on this team yet. How are you, 10 years younger than everyone else? You're going to India. That became the cool thing to do later. You're going to India. You know all these leaders. And I thought, because I said yes when no one else would. I took the hard job when no one else would. I persisted through all of the pushback and all of the resistance because their opinion of me did not affect what I thought of myself. I had learned through my tough early years, and I'm sure many people have those stories along the way where I said, I either absorb what they think of me or I push back and say, I'm not as small as you think I am. Now it's in me. I don't have to worry that someone's like, that wasn't a smart thing to do. Okay, that's your opinion. Here's why I did it, and here's why I'm going to keep doing it. However, the one caution that I have, especially for women, is don't become the janitor. Being a janitor is a respectable job. So I don't want to be dismissive of being a janitor. But in corporate life, women are often given the jobs that other people don't want to do because they feel like it's administrative or secretarial. Tell me, audience, how many times in a meeting when someone offers, like, can someone be the note taker? How many times is it a woman that does that versus the man? Hey, can someone organize the birthday party for Ken and order the birthday cake? Why is it the woman that does that? Hey, we need to organize this event for clients. It's no one's job. Why are the women doing it? That's what I'm talking about. Don't take the small administrative jobs. Wait for the man to raise his hand. Don't volunteer, even if it's uncomfortable and everybody's staring at you. You don't have to be confrontational, but you don't always have to be the person who just picks it up because it makes things go easier. No, I'm talking about doing the hard and tough projects. Make sure that you know what you're getting into. You got to have some strategy around it. Who's your sponsor? Who's got your back? What's the budget? What's the timeline? How much freedom are you going to have to do what you need to do? You got to be smart about it. But when you raise your hand and do the hard job, you will jumpstart your career to levels. You will leapfrog. And yes, maybe somebody will say, you didn't earn your spot here. And I'll say, yes, I did. Because I did more in the past year than you've done in the past 5 years.
Great points, Sonia. So I think what she's saying is, do the hard jobs, make sure you get credit, but don't do. And I think all of us are guilty, to be very frank with you, when, hey, take notes, get the party organized, etc. Don't always raise your hand. Wait for others. I think that's a great point that you make, Sonia, especially for our listeners. Sonia, is there any other inflection point besides this that our listeners should be aware of uh, before we get to a couple of very other important questions I want to ask you?
Well, the one that maybe I'll mention that's more recent, is there came a point at the Gates Foundation where I had been there for 5 years. I had done the really hard thing, a couple of
Hmm.
other projects, rebuilt the HR team, had quite a good reputation there. But we were heading into an era of more a different type of leadership would be required. And, our CEO was making some major changes in the organization that I was
Hmm.
not a fan of, to be honest. And so I
Hmm.
thought, I came here to do a certain amount of work. I did it. I can feel really good about it. The next phase, which I could be a part of, is another 5 years. And now here came the moment where I don't know if I would have been able to make this decision 10 or 15 years ago and say, I am ready to do my own thing. I am ready to move out of traditional corporate life. And if not now, when? I want to write my book. I want to work for a startup again. I don't know what the future looks like. This is a more certain future. This is an uncertain future. And I kind of go back to what my parents' lesson of life is. They moved halfway across the world at a time without phones or they didn't have any money. They had $100. They snuck $100 because India wouldn't let you take more than $8 out. They snuck
Hmm.
$100 in their camera case, and that's all the only money that they had when they moved to America. They had no idea what the future would be, but they had confidence. They had a support network, and they said they had this deep belief. And I know sometimes it doesn't work all the time for everyone. It's not in a fair world. But if I work hard, I'm smart, and I treat others kindly, I'm going to be okay. And that's the leap that I've taken. Ask me in 5 years if it was right or wrong. I don't know, but there's no way it can't be the right thing to do if I follow those lessons.
I think it's a great leap because, as you said, having ambition, treating people the right way, doing the right thing, how can it go wrong? And these are amazing times, Sonia. Um, and we can talk a lot about that. Uh, we have a short window, Sonia, and there's a bunch of things I want to get through.
Sure.
So if I can ask you to just quickly walk our audience through a couple of things which are, I think, important to them. Um, Tell them a little bit quickly if what are a few of your most cherished childhood memories, just one or two or three briefly, because it really reflects on who you are and the decisions you make.
I remember being taken to my parents. They had an Indian community, like I mentioned, and I don't know how old, 5, 6, 7 years old. There's nothing more magical than getting sleepy as a child, and there's like party and lights and clinking glasses and laughter and music, and you're just like in the corner with my sister, and we were getting sleepy, and so you're half conscious, and all you sort of feel is warmth, love, laughter. I remember moments like that very emotionally more than visually. Um, I also remember going to India. My grandfather and grandmother lived in Indore, my father's parents, and I was really close with my grandfather. I just adored him. My mother's father died when I was one. He had one of those flat swings from like a tree, and we would we were both on the quieter side of the family. And usually in the afternoon, we would find each other, and without saying a word, we would just go sit on that swing set and just swing. And sometimes he'd start to tell me stories about his childhood or like mythology or, like the gods. And I also remember that as just a time of being very connected and rooted to my Indian history.
Awesome. Warmth, food, lights, laughter, um, and connectivity with your roots. That's why we call the show Indianness. Um, uh, Incredible. Sonia, every guest on our show talks about the role of mentors. Briefly, have there been mentors? And mentors come in many different shapes, sizes, can be parents, grandparents, and we hear this constant message from you about your grandparents, as well as about your parents, colleagues, etc. Have you had mentors? What do you think of mentors briefly in your view?
I think they're incredible. They're organic. I've run mentoring programs and where you just assign people like matchmaking, and it can kind of work if both sides are participating, but there's nothing better than organic mentorship, where somebody, as they start getting to my age and older, actually want to look towards the rising generation. They're not just concerned about their own growth, but what can I do to help you on this road, which can be very rough and difficult. Maybe I can avoid. But yeah, I've definitely had mentors, people who just were there at the right time. Like when I first became a manager, my manager said to me, always go for being respected, not liked. Because if you go for being liked, you'll be neither. If you go for being respected, you might get both. I never forgot that. I've seen managers who want to be liked, who won't give the tough message to the one person, which means the whole team suffers. Um, or they want to be friends with all of the executives at the risk of losing their own team. But I also really believe in being an advocate. So you take mentoring one more step and say, are you actually doing something for someone else? Like if there's a promotion opportunity, will you say, hey, I think Karan is ready? And people might say, well, they're so quiet and they don't talk much, but they're really smart and they really have a lot to offer. You can do more. Or I've seen it all the times in meetings where a woman or a younger person gets talked over or no one listens to them. And then 2 minutes later, someone makes the same point. And will I interrupt and say, I actually think that was something that Rishi was just saying. Rishi, why don't you tell us more of your thoughts? So I think mentoring is really important, but I also think when you can, couple that with external action to create space for that person, to make sure they're being seen by others, not just by you.
Great points. I love that point about being respected, not liked. And what you're saying is be an advocate for others. If you see them not getting the respect, Sonia, those are great points. Sonia, finally, if you look back and you talk about Sonia who's coming out of high school and going to college, what would be one or two things briefly that you would probably say to her looking back right now? And I know you don't look back. You
Oh,
never
no,
look back.
I do. I just don't want to have regrets because,
No
again,
regrets. This is just a conversation with
yeah, but if I could
Sonia.
give advice to 20-year-old me, I'd say don't spend so many years trying to prove to other people something. I had a professor, well, it doesn't matter. I won't tell the story, but I needed to prove that I was good at math. I needed to prove that I was good at business. I don't know who was paying attention. Nobody cares. But somehow I was in this prove, like I'm smart, I'm capable, I'm tough, especially in investment banking and consulting, really, really hard. Um, and I was spent a lot of time proving. And somewhere when you cross over, and I did so through a very difficult period of my life, I was like, no, the joy is in improving. And the growth, like Satya Nadella, someone I really respect, talks about Carol Dweck's growth mindset as his leadership philosophy. That's joyful. Proving to other people something, that's not joyful. That's energy draining. Going within and saying, how much better, bigger, smarter, kinder can I be? That's joyful. I would have said, don't worry about other people as much. Just focus on your own joy.
Focus on your own joy. I think that's great. Um, So, Sonia, our podcast is called Indianness. So, we ask this question to all our guests. What is your definition of Indianness?
Well, as you can probably tell, I love visuals and poetry and writing, writing a book for the first time. I'm very excited about this. I don't remember how I got here, but we were in a wedding in India, in Rajasthan, in this beautiful area. And I was 13, 14. And I remember breaking away from the wedding, and I had similar themes of lights and noise in the background. But I was standing outside in the grass, and the stars were drilling out of the sky. There was no air pollution or anything, and the moon looked different. Like it was crescent, but it was upside down. It was a direction I had never seen in America, and I remember staring at that, thinking, "I'm at a different point on this planet. The moon is a different angle. The earth feels heavy and grounded. It's millennia old. Like in America, everything can feel very lightweight and fast moving. But in India, in this moment, looking at the moon and the stars and the sound of laughter and music in the background, but me in the dark in this grass, it was like I literally felt rooted, like something was pulling down from me into the ground, but it was enriching, not draining. And many years later, a few years ago, I went to India on a business trip with the Gates Foundation on Aadhaar and their digital public infrastructure, and which is the leader in the world. India's digital public infrastructure has transformed the economy, lives of women. It's truly remarkable. And there's a feeling of anything is possible, India rising. I love this country, America, but we don't have that feeling right now. We feel like we're fractured and we're losing something. So being those two things together make me think of Indianness, that we are rooted in our history, in our religion, our gods, our food, our clothes, the thousands and thousands and thousands of years of people in that land that still speak through us today. But we are hopeful for the future. We feel confident that India and being Indian is a net benefit for this planet. We are good. We are good leaders. We are good people. We are kind. We're tough, and we can be nasty too, obviously. But there's a lot of special, unique qualities that make us, we're grounded in the past, but we will transform the future. For me, that's Indianness.
Wow, that's a great tagline. Maybe the government of India should use. Grounded in the grounded in the past, but transforming the future. Fantastic. Sonia, finally, very briefly, you said you're writing a book. Can you tell our listeners what is it about and when is it coming out?
Oh, sure. Right now, it's provisionally titled Permission Not Required. All these decades of working in leadership and with women, I've noticed that women get told feedback about who we are, and I call them the quiet binds that shrink us. If you're too something, you start shifting and getting smaller and smaller until you've lost yourself. And so every chapter is titled You're Too Something, and it's part memoir, part cultural critique, stories, and a path out of that. How do I recognize that this is what's happened to me? And how do I break out of these binds and actually become fully, wholly me? I'm hoping that it will be published either later this year or early next year.
Oh, fantastic. Can't wait, Sonia. Sonia, thank you so much. You know, your journey as, child of immigrants, somebody who maybe didn't feel right, maybe in school, to coming across to being a leader of HR, and as you said, the largest nonprofit in the world, but it's really truly inspiring. But also your commitment to diversity, the ability to bridge cultures and also be proud of your roots. I think that really exemplifies the best of what Indianness really is and what Indianness contributes to the world. So, your story reminds us all, I think our listeners, that multicultural background isn't just an advantage. It's a superpower that
It
enables us
is.
to really enable complexity and create meaningful change. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and about your family. And look forward to continuing this dialogue. Thank you so much, Sonia.
Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you for the opportunity to come and share and for this podcast. It's doing a lot of good in the world. Thank you.